With some stories, you know what the end is going to be before you even start to really engage with it. Not necessarily in a bad way, like something so tropey that you know the real treasure was the friends we made along the way, or that the persistence of a heroic deed always pays off, but sometimes the end just isn't really hidden. There's not supposed to be a twist reveal, no surprise villain, no great revelation about all that we have seen, but rather the thing which shocks your senses is meant to be yourself. Will you accept what the story has been telling you from the start? Or will you resist and allow for your own input, your own hopes and desires to become a part of the story? Will you hold out for it to be everything which it is not? And as all fiction is in a cycle between mirroring and creating reality, what will it say about you when that time comes? To want what you want and not what you need. These stories are like a friend who says those things, the honest, sometimes hurtful ones that you only realize were right after so much reflection. It takes something you were sure would be reinforced and tears it down so forcefully, hurting you for your own good. Are you willing to evaluate those beliefs you came into it with, those hopes and dreams for a picture-perfect ending, and instead accept the more realistic one you receive? One of those stories is Girl's Last Tour. From the synopsis to the background details of every episode, it plays no games about what the ending will be. We see battlefields full of abandoned weapons, tanks, and bombers surrounding the skeletons which once used them and created them, meaning they've rested there for some time uncollected. We see inhospitable weather that coats this entire layered city in snow time and time again, crushing any signs of life beneath all its deposited weight. We see fuel supplies which run out, we see food scavenged but never produced, we see no animals, no trees, no life except two girls, Chito and Yuuri, or as they call each other, Chi and Yuu. While a couple lives enter the picture here and there, but always end in failure, and there are exceptions where we see a remaining cultivated plant or two, they're just that, exceptions. In a city this large, those people and moments are hardly even half of a percent. And even if a spark of advancement remains, a map or a rudimentary plane, the results are lost in the knowledge which allows them to go further long dead. There is no life and there is no hope of life, no if but only when, as every resource is slowly drained for these two girls making their journey across a rusted over wasteland, the last marks of a human race which ended itself. From museums of art long abandoned to grave sites honoring the dead with items, to planes that once carried troops and bombs, to religions now reinterpreted by a future unaware of their origins and purpose, none of these objects house the meanings they once did, but instead serves this purpose of persisting humanity's last gasp. The buildings happily families once built themselves within are exploded to make bridges across decayed chasms, every sign of life prior falling in comparison to simple travel. The religions that once drove entire cities to place statues of their saviors everywhere now become roadblocks to that travel, disrespected with bumpers and pictures. Entire facilities that once used impressively automated means to feed entire armies are now operating sluggishly by hand for the sake of only two, its former glory now impossible in decay. With books born for warmth and fish fried for food, everything has lost what it once meant to become nothing more than the sustenance of one single pair of girls. These statues, these books and ovens, right now there is nothing more to them than simple utility. Whatever they once meant to someone, sometime. In this disrepair and reinterpretation, it is proved that there is no inherent meaning to any of them because what we see is that they can only be used for what aids survival right now. The art is nothing more than a moment of novelty and the machinery never repaired because its fruits are needed too soon. That religion is simply guesswork once it has been scavenged, and books are nothing more than fuel to keep a fire and this whole cycle repeating. The people in the past, all their work, everything which was made, everything in the world which is now dying, and as such the world itself, none of it means anything more than whatever extends these two lives in this exact moment. This is the existentialist premise of the series, that there is no meaning inherent to this world or its parts. Everything crumbles and everyone dies. We take nothing with us, and there is no point to anything which has been, is being, or will ever be done. You were born for nothing and will die for nothing. And yet, among all the rubble, these two girls continue on still. They see everything around them, everything we just discussed that they themselves even sometimes acknowledge, and yet their Kettencrad chugs along across skeletons and windmills alike, always chasing the city upwards since the day their grandfather saw them off and the war cannibalized itself. But it's more than just continuing, really, because continuing would be easy to understand. Continuing is meals and sleep. Continuing is a statement of nature and nothing of nurture. But to laugh, to smile in a situation like this, a snowball fight in a battlefield marred by endless death, a bomber which once dispensed the destruction surrounding them now the perch for a happy meal and a good view, ruined pipes crafted into the bathtubs to clean oneself and relax, as if there was some point to be relaxed and clean despite the end of the world. They don't just continue, they happily thrive. They carry forward an indomitable human spirit. How do they manage this in a world which is so inevitably doomed? The reason why is what we left out of the crucial existentialism definition. There is no meaning inherent to the world, but there is meaning which we create within it through our awareness, our conscious decisions. There's something more than just survival, and in fact, survival and awareness only coexist when there is something more. The answer lies in how the girls survive. We mentioned all of these things that they've come across, and isn't that kind of odd? Why would they see such great places for survival and then give them up? Why make it to the museum at all when there is a facility which can make rations and at the same time keep you warm and supplied with water? This is the grocery store in the apocalypse every vault dweller dreams of. This aspect becomes apparent early on where they enter a facility and notice a pipe carrying hot water. My initial thought when seeing this is of course that you follow that, find its source, so you can have all the hot water and energy you would need. They literally just almost died from the cold, so it feels even more imperative right now to have that source, to no longer worry about fuel like they do so often. But what they do instead is shoot the pipe on a seam to release the water, and then collect it in a rusted old pipe to act as a waterfall hot bath. For this one moment of enjoyment and comfort, they ruin their chances to ever have another. The same feeling comes up when they meet other people, form bonds with them, and then still part ways, ensuring that they'll never meet again. Isn't there survival in numbers? Couldn't they all get together in a facility like this and act as a safe little family in what remains of the world, existing for as long as possible against all odds? At least this is what I wanted to scream when watching it. Two characters I was instantly endeared to through their antics and their soft and expressive art style, and wanted to see as happy as possible. But staying in one place like that and perfecting its means of survival is not the best way to actually survive when one is aware. The danger they place themselves in time and time again, from blasting coal to crumbling bridges, that is true survival. Let's closer examine what a place of perfected survival would be in the girls' last tour context. The pair would be resting on one of those former military bases forever, eating rations and burning every last drop of fuel essentially for free. In that space, those warm baths which were once so special would become more like commonplace, a chore of their daily lives rather than a refreshing break which made all their efforts of travel worthwhile. Its meaning gained from their actions would be rendered mute. This makes it something to be done without any thought or input but what's on one's mind, as if your life right now consisted only of doing the dishes and folding laundry, those absent-minded tasks. In decent amounts, this is fine. It's a space to contemplate the more important aspects of life, our path and our legacy in concrete terms, for example. But with only those moments and with only that kind of time, we would see that none of it matters as our minds reach the extent of reason. And existentialism would creep in and we would realize that we were doing the dishes and folding the laundry just to end up in the same void as all things, that all of our contemplation and efforts alike did and do nothing. Whatever time, place, race, sex, creed, or anything, everything ends the same way. It's even worse in a ruined city like this, where there is much less to go over in one's mind before reaching this fact. There is no art and no society and no work to place so much distance between them and the inevitable end. This consideration is reached when the ration recipe is perfected, and when the fuel is securely controlled, and when the conversations with others run thin and purposes merge into nothing but the survival of a herd acting as one. What they would be left with, having a place where they easily survive from never moving forward, is simply being squared up with the end, with futility. With nothing to work towards, with nowhere to go, one is left to consider fully what it is all for, and across all times and places, but especially here, that is nothing. Every single ounce of being, every single cell in the brain would be locked onto this purpose, and so from ultimate survival would arise death. The conscious awareness that there is no difference between baking the rations and running the bath or death. Life would lose all purpose to be lived, and even if one kept going, they would be nothing more than a machine, rising to repeat the same actions to the same inputs to reach the same outputs each and every day. It would become nothing more than a factory, a sign of life, a facilitation of it, but life itself, a factory, is not. Rather, what one needs is some distraction from this truth, some nugget, however small or unimportant, which they can place meaning in. They need some reason for survival, something for it to facilitate, just as the factory is not the end to itself, but rather the means to another. The world may have no meaning within it for us to find, but it does have all the chances in the world for us to create meaning with our actions. We take something and we chase it. This is why they leave it behind, what Yuu and Chi do, and always moving upwards from the lower layers of the city to the higher ones. It's what their grandfather left them with, sending them away only with the advice to always go towards the top of the city. It isn't something solid, it isn't a goal with a known end more than the top, but that's the point. It is simply the impulse to not remain, but to move. To destroy what must be destroyed for forward motion, and to leave what must not, to use and consume, but always for something more than just to use and consume, to not even question that they should stay in one place, because of course they should keep moving. It is something for their attention to always go to always keep the end just far enough away. This is actually the benefit of all things being meaningless. It really is that easy to take anything and supply it with meaning. To be able to satisfy an entire life with nothing more than the sentiment to move forward. Isn't this something quite beautiful? With nothing more than the power of our reason, we conquer all which we will ever encounter in a single thought, one sentence which declares, "Life persists because I say so." And their journey is the summary of that. The reason they come across all these different places and the professions those places once held, all the different objects and so many means, is to provide validity to them all. To separate itself from any one purpose like art or family or rebuilding, and instead have them enacting the very principle of purpose itself, motion and direction. They are not artists and they are not authors. They are not bakers nor are they builders. What they are is simple people with purpose. People who always move forward. With this essence that Chi and Yuu embody, any medium, any genre, any custom or idea or lifestyle or family can become how one moves forward into the next day with vigor and meaning. But it's not like this truly makes one unaware of the futility, turning their eyes away from it as a dog would be distracted by the appearance of a treat. That is a situation we'll address later. Chi and Yuu don't always discuss their situation, and not always so openly, but they do speak about the fear of death, about the point of being human, about the seeming pointlessness of their days, round and round in circles as they climb the tower to the next level, and coming to no hopeful conclusion about it. The conversation ends only with acknowledgement. Yeah, most of what they do is wake up and then travel and then eat and then sleep and then repeat forever. When taken in solid terms, they can easily see how futile life is, those repetitive motions which draw a circle as the same point repeats in the same coordinates and rotation again and again. Does something as silly as going up matter when this is the case, when so many days seem the same? Even with purpose, are we not aware enough to find futility overwhelming? However, this situation only makes a circle when viewed in two dimensions. If we add the third dimension, the necessary context of their actions, what we would see is a spiral, a circle which is being drawn by a single point moving upwards in space. What we're adding is time, the ability for that point to leave behind a tail which shows its true path, a path that is not around and around, but up and around. That the same day again and again can still have an impact down the road so long as one is aware of that future goal. And this is why things can never be 100% meaningless. Because no matter how small the change in height, when one examines things in full, adds the necessary dimensions to truly witness it, they'll see that the change is being made, the goal being reached. Each day simply passing into the next with the mere thought of a goal is progress towards it. Even if the change is 10 years down the line, it's still a change which will happen, still more than survival. So even if some of the days look the same, even if some of the days are the same, they do not lack the meaning which drove them. Purpose still creates the action. This is what Yuu expressed as getting along with hopelessness. She doesn't state embracing it, but simply getting along with it. Walking beside it, knowing that it's there the whole way, but under one's conscious action, choosing to look away from it and walk along anyway. As it tries to grab you, your step remains locked one ahead as you persist for the reason you chose. But now we're back to the dog and the treat. Why is that not the arrangement? Why do we have to get along with our futility at all when we've seen that some willful ignorance to it is required? Wouldn't it be better to simply ignore it outright, to justify our actions with our entire hearts, and to push forward into the future of dreams towards some ideal state? In that world, isolated in our minds, we'd have all the possibilities and all the change that could ever be. We'd have no need to justify the slow crawl of one point across time. However, as we explore that fully embracing futility leads one to the end, we find the same result here in fully rejecting it. In Girl's Last Tour, it is expressed through the case of a hatchery with one remaining fish, one remaining AI caretaker for it, and one remaining AI builder combing the city for its resources. The former of the two AI was created with the intent to protect the fish, and this is all it exists for. It exits sleep when the fish needs feeding, when something it can repair needs to be, and when someone enters the facility. And of course, the last is very rare. It isn't unaware of its futility, or at least it was programmed to seem that way if nothing else, or maybe developed that way over time, as it allows the girls to swim in the now empty pools, contaminating them with no AIs left to clean them back out and probably no chemicals remaining to do so. That is, this AI knows that these pools are useless. One single fish can't reproduce to fill them again. The task is clearly futile. Its reason is alive, but with no hope to survive forever, to rebuild. If this AI were focused on some ideal, some dream of a repopulated hatchery, then it would be already dead. It would have seen the lack of point to all it was doing in feeding one fish to the bitter end for no point and shut down forever. The AI essentially dies, the fish dies too, the girls lose out on this experience. That's at least 3 negative things from it focusing on an ideal state, on a dream, ignoring hopelessness rather than getting along with it. Things actually fall apart faster in the ideal state because the ideal is always in conflict with its natural end, with futility. But because this AI gets along with hopelessness instead, it gets a better result. It will meet no different end because no things do, but it got to persist longer, and that is the very purpose of purpose. Ignoring futility only defeats the careful balance needed to reach the most tomorrows. And this is not simply a personal imperative, but a social one as well. We can harm the purposes of others when we ignore this necessary context of futility. We see this with the other AI. With a much larger body, it is set for a different task. It rips apart the portions of the city which have lost their utility, removing pointless resources so that other places can have them, new systems be built, and important ones repaired. The hatchery becomes its target, of course, since it's so pointless. Against the wishes of the first AI, it begins to tear it down in sloppy fashion, pretty easily showcasing that these parts won't go anywhere else since it treats them with such little care. It's expecting what it once had, a bustling room full of drones which would acquire the scrap materials and repurpose them after it destroyed them, which no longer exists. Like the former, it is fulfilling a purpose, but unlike the former, it is doing so in a world which doesn't exist for that anymore. It is tearing things down so that they can be reused elsewhere, as if this city has any hope. But where are the humans to direct this change? Where are the drones to pick it up? Upon its back sit the same parts that were probably lashed there ages ago, resting uselessly as it tears down what remains of purpose for the hope of one which is long dead. And where does it stop? If it can see that this hatchery is useless, then can it see that everything else is too? in the name of progress, it will continue to destroy until nothing is left. Its overly hopeful assumption, whether purposeful or coded, is actually a negative thing. It takes the last remnants of something which can be worthwhile to others from their input in all these places it has torn down across time and this one in the present, and leaves them as nothing more than scrap. For imagination's sake, it will end the life of another, enforcing futility so quickly exactly by ignoring it. Luckily, the girls stop it, saving the purpose of the AI which got along with hopelessness, and showing an example of why this getting along with it is so important. That isn't to say that imagination is bad. It is part of how we create purpose at all, by picturing a future we may find. With no imagination, we would simply be existing just to exist. We see Chi and Yuu do the same with their dreams, on one of the middle layers coming across a house which is in more decent shape than usual, still with a table and 2 chairs. They sit down in what is to them an unimaginably comfortable space and relax for a night, dreaming about what all this could be. Chi with her bookshelf entirely filled, and Yuu with a pantry full of food, and how they would rest upon a bunk bed together at night. It's a striking scene watching them enter that space so vividly for a moment, so in contrast to the reality they know. To see the human mind be capable of this, even at such a dire time, is truly something. We can't discount the power of such a beautiful thing. But the most important part is what they do next. They come back to reality. The dream fades away, and we're reminded of the truth that these things are almost impossible, at least right now. They would require so much work and effort and time. In other words, that is, as many tomorrows as possible. And that's exactly why the moments of a dream can be so important. They add something to the tomorrows. They put texture and context to what one is chasing. With those hopes in their head, they'll push on even harder, because maybe such things will be on the next level, and if not there, maybe on the next one above it. After all, they do eventually find a library on the scale of Babel's, sort of achieving even more than this dream for a moment. Even if they have to leave it behind because, as all things, it is ultimately pointless, it provided a pep in their step to have this dream, to imagine some small, possible result as a consequence of their purpose. Not the result of the purpose itself, but simply a consequence of it. Part of the point is that no human is so perfect as to follow these philosophies exactly, to be entirely focused on just reaching the next tomorrow without results. We are meant to gather and grow to see results, and so we have to build in a bit of room for how we naturally function. I think we've shown why we need to get along with hopelessness well, even if sometimes we dream. However, a question might still arise in the simplistic, almost flimsy reasons for existing that we've seen so far. Can something which is so minimal really be the stuff of entire lives? A single fish, the words always upwards? Can these things really be trusted to sustain a whole human being? A writer or an author or a craftsman undertakes a whole host of duties. They form a legacy which persists in their craft, and multiple things left behind to validate all they've done. Even if they lose that purpose, there is a reminder that it was, a reason not to despair, some proof that they were here. Isn't that a lot stronger? It probably is, but we have to remember the context of a purpose. In this world, there are no authors, there are no artists, and the only builder had just enough resources to make one thing, which took her whole life. There is no infrastructure to publish, no spare materials to waste on something without survival value. And where is the time? When you have to repair the pipes constantly to prevent leaks, then taking care of one fish is a lot bigger of a task. When you have to scavenge for food and fuel, and defend against the cold, and wash your clothes every single time you find any source of water, then there isn't any time or energy left to write a whole book or paint an entire canvas. Survival itself is taking most of their life in this harsh world. Many of you probably feel the same, that in your world there are no writers and no artists possible. And that sucks. It's unfair, and so much potential is wasted each and every day due to this fact. I hope deeply that it changes. But this does not mean that it must change for a life to have purpose and persist. Because in their world, there are still journals, if not entire books, and there are still doodles left next to the fine art of the past, if not fine art itself. In their context, where each day is a struggle so deep against life itself, these are accomplishments. To have to do so much responsibility each and every day just to persist, and then to still fulfill anything extra? That's as admirable as an artist with all the free time in the world crafting a masterpiece when we consider context. The point is, when we talk about that spiral, it doesn't actually have to be moving upwards if the plane around it is moving downwards instead. It creates the same effect either way. Simply just maintaining as the world falls apart is kind of the same as progress itself. It's part of why context matters. Purpose only has to be as grand as its surroundings. This can be taken as an understandably harsh envy, and at times should be, because the world can be made truly unfair by those with power and ill will. Just because we can have meaning in unfairness doesn't mean we should accept it outright. We should push for equity and opportunity for all to chase the same kinds of context, because that is for the good of all. However, whether this is the case or not, there is also a commonality to all purpose which provides comfort. Chi and Yuu, with a camera they receive from one traveler they meet, take pictures along the way, eventually having the entire memory brought up on a console, something they weren't aware that they could do. What they see is an entire history of who owned this camera before them, dating all the way back to before the first time the world destroyed itself and through the second until now. It's a stunning montage which makes the show worth watching by itself, where we see mothers and fathers who get to raise their children, and the kids of others who get to race and win trophies, the point of development itself. We see the girls their age who get to build replicating robots as their club activity in school, and we see war and destruction mixed in alike, bragging about the deaths of millions and the war machines that can topple a city, all of that purpose in seconds. We see all kinds of people, the ones who have it almost endlessly better than these two, and also the ones who have it even worse, the bodies piled on the ground, whoever once owned the camera lying dead behind its view, only their hand remaining as who they were. On this camera is everything. And the girl's response is not to be jealous of the ones before them with it much better, the ones who got so much more knowledge as Chi wishes to have, and to eat so much more as Yuu wishes to do, but to instead simply say, once you find out that people used to live like this, I kind of feel a little less lonely. They don't despair because despair would ignore the context and say outright that one purpose is greater than another, which is illogical. After all, every purpose ends the same one day. It fails when our life ends. One cannot mean more than the others because it leads to nothing different so long as both created more tomorrows. No matter the time, the class, the society, the effort, and energy, they will all be validated as exactly the same in the end. They helped someone survive until they didn't. Chi and Yuu feel less lonely because here is some proof of unfairness, yes, but also of validity. All of these different things are now equal on the same camera, each just one line of ones and zeros representing a point in time and space which is long gone. All of these people, in love, in war, in better and in worse, fighting the same battle and sharing the same experience. Purpose. Nothing matters, but nothing matters together. We can all have a reason to see the next day. Despite all of our talk of simplicity and validity, though, we can't deny that some amount of consideration is due to choosing a path. We've been looking entirely small picture and abstract to ignore this, focusing on moments at a time. But if a purpose is meant to carry us into the next day, then it should be able to carry us into many next days. It shouldn't put us in untold danger so that we lose our lives anyway, but it also shouldn't stagnate us before we can even act, because then what was the point of those tomorrows? Let's consider two examples. Say someone decided that the only purpose as one of the last two humans alive was to eat everything they could find, explore dark and dangerous holds, and mess around with old weapons. Whatever the case, all they would do was follow their whims and whimsy with little regard to any kind of path or purpose. Or say, another person in the same situation decided that they should gather all the information they can about the past people and things, and then create their own information for the next ones, so that they can make an accurate read of every single thing they encounter, and then allow others to do the same. That is, they will stick vehemently to their path and their purpose. The former is obviously very dangerous and would probably get one killed quickly, as it almost did in the very first episode. They explored a random facility and ended up in darkness for days on end by Yuu's request. They only end up making it out because a spit-covered hand she has from Yuu's sleeping habits allows her to find a breeze which must be coming from outside and follow it, a calculating action of deliberate decision. In Yuu's execution of their purpose, where there is no regard given to how quickly or orderly they follow it, they'll just end up dead from having nothing to actually stay alive for, no reason to protect their lives from danger. And so, that defeats the very purpose of purpose to not consider its execution at all. It's supposed to get us into tomorrow, but all it would do is push them vigorously forward through a few and leave them dead soon after. There has to be some consideration of those tomorrows which are a bit further off, that we can say everything exists only for this moment in time, but in practice no more is required. It's another act of recognizing that no philosophy is perfect in reality, but they are still good tools to pull us closer to the path they seek. However, the latter way, Chi's way, also has some issues. It sidesteps all of this danger that we saw with Yuu by charting a direct course to the purpose, avoiding all of those obstacles, and ensuring purpose has a purpose. In theory. There are so many complex factors. For example, so much to learn about this city and its past inhabitants to chart that course, so many ways to examine which would lead to the most efficient use of food and fuel, so very many options for all things that if one really took the time to perfect it and guarantee all next tomorrows, they would simply use them on planning. They would be stuck tracing the circle without time, spinning wheels in place for nothing more than an idea of survival with no actual motion, bringing back our first issue of despair. We see this when danger meets the girls, and Chi's calculating nature holds them back a little bit. Climbing one of the towers to the next level, they come across a patchwork scaffolding to replace the concrete stairs that have crumbled. It has minimal support, and so the heavy Kettencrad will surely break it. Slow and steady Chi takes it carefully, clearly with the idea of listening and moving slowly and cautiously. However, if one starts to hear the signs of failure anywhere past the first few steps, it's way too late to be moving slowly. You're in the middle and can't go back, but don't have enough time to go forward either. And so we see that when it does start to collapse, and Yuu has to reach forward and grab the accelerator and twist it more than Chi was, they just hardly managed to get across in time. If it had been Chi's way alone, they would have fallen from thinking too much about how to go about their task. Both sides had their faults which had to be saved by the other. So is it simply that there is a time and place for both? Yes, but there's also more. Neither moment was strictly one or the other. When Chi saved them by escaping via the wind's path, she only had the idea to do so because of some nonsense that came out of Yuu's desire for food in her sleep, sticking Chi's hand in her mouth. It's not really actively taking part, but it's doing what that unfettered lack of caution provides. Crazy ideas that could sometimes work in desperate situations. A truly, strictly, carefully crafted solution would have been like following the left-hand side at all times as if it were a maze, but that might take so long they would perish before finding the exit. It needs some amount of bold risk to pick a direction and go for it, and it was some amount of both of them which created that. The same is true when Yuu accelerates the Kettencrad. Chi still had to steer it, still had to set them on the path to actually put that increased velocity to use. It wasn't one, but both. The point is an ever-evolving push and pull which respects the current context. Some days will be days of planning to ensure that a great push goes through, or to recover from a past one, or maybe it's just a constant line of both. But it will always require both, some reason to act with passion and some reason to hinder that passion for longevity. It is this kind of adaptability which is required of purpose, so that it can be tested and persist, face the trials like we saw in others' dreams and ill will, and still keep us going. Like the journey that these two take, it should be a long and winding path, spurring off at times to gather something new or find some aspect to dream about, but then always returning to the path and pushing directly forward here and there. It should be as long and winding as possible, evolving, maybe even the goalposts shifting further out as it goes along specifically to make it longer. That is, to make it see as many tomorrows as possible. It can detour and struggle, it can sit still and then burst forth, it can even be dropped entirely and picked back up because it evolves. Above all, it is only meant to persist so that we can do the same. And we fall into this rhythm for a while. Like watching each next episode of the story, it becomes easier and natural. We feel at home in its performance. We watch the girls cross so many situations, so many old stories and new ones alike, even meet other people and see different cultures from the past and persist. We watch them face danger and almost lose hope and yet continue. We watch them smile and laugh amongst the desolation. We watch how they've mastered purpose in their combination, and we find hope in that story. We see that life springs even in such a terrible place. We see the power of purpose to push things forward what feels like indefinitely. We feel that for a moment, humanity cannot be defeated even if we destroy ourselves. And then everything starts to fall apart. You won't see this in the anime alone, but with a single hour of extra reading for volumes 5 and 6 of the manga, you get a fantastic look at how the story truly ends. First, we witness an AI which has existed for years and years alone now, able to write code to sustain this final tower, but unable to execute it without human intervention, someone to press the start button. It rests here as a caretaker alone, writing poetry that only machines can understand in its code, and able to share it only with empty, meaningless space. The girls speak with it about the purpose of life and what it all means, and when it has them send the elevator up, it also has them kill it. It rewrote the code so that it would be terminated for the elevator to work, admitting as it fades away that after so many years, even with its poetry and its purpose, it wished for an end. It survived for so long that even with meaning, hopelessness became impossible to not embrace. Then the Kettencrat has a tread break, and as she is working to fix that, something else breaks, and as that is fixed, something else breaks, and it continues until the machine is hopelessly broken, splayed out in parts on the floor. In what seems almost like a moment of power, they turn it into a bath and use the remaining fuel to heat it, taking one last dip into a pool of comfort. And then Chi starts to cry out, facing the loss of something she worked so hard to maintain, something she always thanked for its service to them. This thing was the third character, and now it's dead. The fuel they carried with so much care is now entirely useless to their cause, the machine which drove them meeting a cold end in pieces, its meaning entirely deceased. As they begin to walk their way up the summit, the end of purpose in sight, without the Kettencrat, they're using more energy, moving slower and stopping to need to fire more often. And so, all the books that Chi so carefully hung on to from the very start end up burned for fuel. The knowledge and entertainment of the past, entire years spent on a work of literature, lost forever just to survive one more day. And when those run out, the journal that she so carefully kept, a record of the last two humans and their experience, her achievement in a horrible world, that's burned too. Every single thing they embedded with meaning along the way is discarded, every single effort reduced to ash. It gets them just enough to start ascending the final section, a dark space without any sounds or any light. They end up using the last of their food, and in exhaustion of having none and yet still walking, they end up losing their will to speak. From the constant motion and the cold, they have little feeling left in their bodies. They simply wake up, walk, sleep, and repeat, blurring the line between life and death. All they have, the only feeling which remains, is holding each other's hands where they can squeeze and release just enough to communicate that the other still exists too, and that their purpose is to keep walking upwards. And with nothing else but that, in fact, within literal nothingness itself, they continue. Even in this situation, even when faced with the very idea of hopelessness surrounding them and undeniable, they still only get along with it and never embrace it. The human spirit with this purpose that we decide truly pushes through anything. In context, it is never too small. It is derived from anything we choose. It is always indomitable above the conditions surrounding it, and we conquer everything with almost nothing. That is how tough a human is. And then there it is, the light finally starts to return and they see the top as if all their efforts will be paid off. Through all of that, their struggles, their loss, their fear, their triumph, and their feeling like they succeeded. They pushed through the most a human could ever be faced with despair and made it to the highest a human could anyway. And what they find is nothing. The stairway ends a bit above the platform and a meaningless cube rests upon the top. There is nothing here at the height of humanity, at the end of the human spirit, because of what we knew from the start, that it is all futile. Humanity has ended. None of it, no effort, no feeling, no pursuit or purpose could change the end. It makes it immensely impactful because we wanted to deny this fact. We wanted the episodes and the characters to prove us wrong somehow. We got attached to these girls and wanted to see them survive. We wanted to see a portal to space or some collection of humanity's strongest. We wanted them to achieve a dream and go even higher to the moon. We wanted life in the universe to be wrong, just as we wish for ourselves. Like Chi, who begins to cry and question what they could have done differently, we want to do anything, change any past or present to create any future at all. Faced with the end, she wishes that they lived differently in order to find another tomorrow, and despite everything we learned here today, I cried too for the exact same reason. I wished so desperately they went back, gave it up, and continued. I can speak all of these words. I can take days upon days, weeks, months, years of my life to find these lessons and pass them on, and I too am nothing more than a slave to the hope of another tomorrow from it all. It is this hope which is probably driving all of it. We don't really believe all of this philosophy wholeheartedly, but rather use it to justify our hope. We know that the chances of us ending in the same void as everyone else is a 99.99999 repeating endlessly % chance, and that a number like that is essentially the same as just saying 100. But we add all of those extra words to keep that hope alive, a hope which rests in the idea of one single one left to be added after an endless amount of zeros, but a one that's required nonetheless. And this hope pushes us forward because if we embrace hopelessness, we guarantee the 100%. But when we merely get along with it, we keep alive the chance of that one that's required after the endless zeros. After all, it probably doesn't matter in the end either way. So why not take the path with a chance at least? Why not reach the top even when we know what will be there? This idea likely being what is at the heart of purpose, that we delude ourselves to ignore the end more than when we think with heaps and heaps of logic, so many words, doesn't really change much. We don't have to truly embody the Platonic ideal of purpose to get its benefits, we just need the idea of it to reason our next tomorrow. The only difference when we know this final fact, which we all know when the end is finally there, is that the end is sad. As humans who have reason but are beholden to emotion, no matter how strictly we adhere to philosophy, we will reach this end and feel sad for its inevitable failure, even if we knew it would be so the whole time. We don't sit back and go, at least it was fun. Like Chi, we cry for the end. Like Chi, we wish to give up anything for another tomorrow. But all along, you might have been the truly mature one. When Chi starts to cry and question, she just throws a snowball at her, bringing them back to the same kinds of days they always had from the very start. She removes all of those questions with the effort of this exact moment in time. And when that moment is over, when they're exhausted and left to contemplate, all she says is, living was the best, wasn't it? It seems she's made complete peace with the end that she knew the whole time, had no delusions but chased it anyway. Like how she threw the rifle she carried the entire time off the edge so easily without a single tear, even as Chi despaired for the loss of everything she held with her. It's because that sadness is the point. She kept going so that it could be this sad, the saddest thing possible. Because along the way you accumulate all that meaning in objects, in people, in places, signs of a life which was well lived, a purpose which may not have succeeded in finding that elusive one after all the zeros, but which made a path unlike any other. In summation, a wholly unique take on the idea of purpose and the human experience. That it was something which never was before and will never be again, something which is really worth ending. And so it does end. You watch everything you worked for fall away, having served its purpose to push you forward, and feeling sad for each meaning lost is proof that what you chose those things for worked out well. All that meaning which can only be truly recognized in those final tears against an inevitable end. What all people should hope for is that when they die, it will be the saddest death possible. And not a single thing can be changed about the end if it is sad, because to do so would be to defeat the purpose of all those tears. Like Chi wished, if you change something about the past to survive another day, then you alter those moments, you alter those meanings which made this moment so sad, But all of that is what makes you wish for more to begin with. The origin of the feeling seeks to defeat itself, and so it can't occur. The fact that you wish for another day just means you succeeded as much as is possible, that your purpose was so good you want to chase it again and again and again. The sadness of the ending perfects everything which came before. It locks your life within a paradoxical despair that, for the only time ever, allows us to embrace the end, but with a smile on our face. Because there isn't a single thing that we should have done differently. This is what Yuu expresses to Chi, and they sit down together against the cube just like they would have anywhere else in this damn city. They share one last meal that Yuu didn't realize she had, boil a bit more water to enjoy with it, and wrap up together to ride out the cold with each other's warmth. It is just like any other day they had before. It's a repeat of so much before, because there isn't a single thing they should change. All they should do, all they should have ever done is live until the bitter end. You see that happiness through to the conclusion. You see it through with even your last moments because that respects all it means. You extend it into as many next days as you can and never stop, even when the end has always been so near and clear. And when you get to the end and you feel like crying, you laugh and you smile. Because that sadness means that your life was perfect.